Welcome back, KSTS scientists. Today we're going to talk about how organisms in an ecosystem interact. So let's go ahead and get started. So there are three main categories of interaction. The first is competition. The second is predation. And the last is something called symbiosis. So we'll briefly review these first two, which are probably more familiar to you, and then we'll spend a lot of time talking about that third one. So let's start with competition. Competition is when organisms fight over a limited resource, like food or a space to make their nest or den, or even a mate. Now, for each of these types of interactions, we are going to draw some smiley faces to help us remember what is going on in this interaction. For competition, you're just going to have to find some space on your paper to draw these. It could be in the margin or wherever you see some empty space. So in competition, the organisms are fighting. So they're both a little bit unhappy about this, and I'm going to draw some eyebrows on there to show that they're fighting over this limited resource. So why do organisms compete? Well, every organism has a particular niche in an ecosystem. This word looks like niche, but it's pronounced niche. A niche is an organism's role in the ecosystem. It's like its whole resume. It includes its habitat, its prey, its predators, where it likes to hang out. And if two organisms have a very similar niche, then they're likely to compete with one another for resources. So what we find a lot in nature and in ecosystems is that organisms avoid competition by having different niches, different roles in the ecosystem. For example, if we look at these different wading birds, the flamingo that has a very long neck is able to find food that's buried in the sand underneath the water, whereas something like this little plover that instead of competing with the flamingo, instead looks for food on land. And so the organisms find ways to take advantage of different niches in the ecosystem rather than compete with one another. So at this point, you're going to pause the video and answer your first stop and jot. You're going to need these pictures on the screen to help you. Make sure to have your teacher check your answer before you keep going. The next interaction that we're going to talk about is predation. And we're actually been talking about this sort of with our discussion of food webs and food chains, right? Because predation is when one organism hunts and kills another. So the hunter is called the predator, and the food is called the prey. So the predator who gets the food is happy, and the prey is dead. So I'm going to draw these two faces somewhere on my paper, and you should do the same on yours, so find some space in the margin. And it's important to note that in ecosystems, the population of predator and prey are linked to one another. And again, we thought about this when we looked at our food webs and food chains, and we said, what happens if this organism increases, what's going to happen to this other organism? So in general, if prey populations increase, then there's going to be more food for the predator, and so the predator population is going to start to increase. But if predator populations start to be too large, then prey populations are going to go down, right? And then once the prey goes down, once there's not enough food, the predator is going to also go down. So this graph is showing this kind of cycle of predator-prey populations that we tend to see in ecosystems. Okay, go ahead and pause the video and answer your next stop and jot. Make sure to have me check your answer before you keep going. So we finally have gotten to our third category of interactions, and the one that might be the most new for you, and that's something called symbiosis. So symbiosis has this root in it, bio, which we know means life, and it also has this prefix sym, which means together. And so symbiosis means living together. So organisms that are in what's called a symbiotic relationship or interaction, or organisms that are going to live very close to one another, and they're both going to live. In most cases, the organism is not hunting and killing another one, and there's different categories of symbiotic relationships. So the first category is something called mutualism. So when you think of something that's mutual, it usually means that it's like equal. And a mutualistic relationship, mutualism, is when both organisms benefit from the interaction. So you're going to write this description on your paper. And we are going to associate mutualistic relationships, mutualism, with two smiley faces, right? Because both organisms are benefiting, both are happy. So now let's go through a few examples. So in my first example, I have a flower and I have a butterfly. So what is each organism getting from this relationship? Well, the butterfly is getting food from the flower, so it's happy. And the flower is getting pollinated by the butterfly. The butterfly is carrying the pollen from this flower to other flowers so that it can reproduce. So they're both getting something out of this interaction. So happy, happy means mutualism. Here we have what's called a cleaner shrimp and an eel. And the cleaner shrimp is actually going into the mouth of this eel and eating away bacteria and little funguses that might be growing in the mouth of the eel. Now the cleaner shrimp is more than happy to do this because it gets food. And the eel is happy because his teeth are going to stay in good shape. It's like a visit to the dentist. And so both organisms are getting something out of this relationship. So it is mutualism. They're both happy. Now here we have a special plant called a legume that has these bacteria that live on its roots. And these bacteria actually help this plant get a very important nutrient that all living things need to survive. They help the plant get something called nitrogen. And so the plant is happy because it gets nitrogen from the bacteria. And the bacteria are happy because they get a place to live. So everybody's happy. So you can write down all or at least a couple of these examples of mutualism. We have 3 here on your paper. Okay, the next type of relationship is commensalism. Commensalism. So in commensalism, one organism benefits and the other organism is neither hurt nor, it's neither hurt nor helped by the interaction. So they're just kind of neutral. So I'm going to represent this in smiley faces with one happy face and one kind of neutral face. Not happy, not sad. Sometimes you can remember this like the O in commensalism is like 0, like neutral. It's not plus, it's not minus, it's just neutral. So let's go over a few examples of commensalistic relationships or commensalism. So this is actually a human eyelash. And these little guys are eyelash mites that live at the base of human eyelashes. It is very likely that you have some of these living on your eyelashes right now and you didn't even know it because they just eat dead skin that grows around the base of our eyelashes, and there's not really any good way to get rid of them. If you rubbed them off, they would just eventually find their way back because they are so pervasive in the environment. So the eyelash mites are happy. They get a place to live and yummy dead skin to eat. And the humans, we don't really notice them. They don't really help us. They don't really hurt us. And so this is an example of commensalism. Now here we have a tree and an orchid flower. So the orchid is actually growing on the tree, but it's not sucking nutrients away from the tree. It's just using the tree as a place to anchor itself so that it can get more sunlight than if it grew on the floor of the forest. And so the orchid is happy because it's getting more sunlight, and the tree is not hurt and it's not helped by this relationship, so it's just neutral. Now, of course, there are some plants that grow on trees that actually suck nutrients away from the trees, and that would be a different kind of relationship that we're about to talk about. So you can write down both of these examples on your paper: humans and eyelash mites, and orchids and trees. All right, our third type of symbiotic relationship is parasitism. Parasitism is when one organism benefits, and we call that organism the parasite, while another is hurt or harmed by the interaction, and that organism is called the host. You can remember this: parasitism makes you sick, right? It kind of sounds like sick. And so in this relationship, one organism is happy, but the other is hurt or harmed. Now, it is important to note that parasitism is not the same thing as predation, right? In predation, one organism hunts and kills another organism, so that organism is dead. In this interaction, the other organism is not killed, at least initially. Sometimes if an organism has a parasite living in or on them for long enough, it could cause them enough harm that they do die, but it's actually not the parasite's goal to kill its host, because it usually needs the host to stay alive in order for the parasite to stay alive. So not the same thing as predation. So here are two examples. So this is the inside of a human's intestine. So again, we have a human, and then this is a tapeworm that's living inside of those intestines, feeding off of the human's food. So the tapeworm is happy because it's getting a nice cozy place to live inside the intestine, and the human is not so happy because they are losing nutrients that they need to this tapeworm, and also probably feeling some discomfort from having a tapeworm inside them. This is another example. This could be a human and a mosquito. So the mosquito sucks blood from the human. I'm not sure if there's an E on the end of that or not. So the human is not happy because they lose some blood, plus it's going to itch, and they might even get sick from this mosquito if it's carrying an illness. And the mosquito is happy because it gets blood and energy that it needs to reproduce. So you could write down either of these examples on your paper, either human and tapeworm or human and mosquito. These are examples of parasitism. So now it's time to pause the video and do your last stop and jot. When you are finished, you can do your Cornell questions and then your summary. Thanks for watching. Bye.